everyone, it's Lily here. As always, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is a big one because we're going to dive deep into the entire timeline of Teyvat, from the very beginning of the world all the way up to the events happening in the game right now. If you've ever wondered how everything connects from Celestia and Khaenri'ah to the Archon War and beyond, this video will finally put all the pieces together. So make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your own theories about how the story might continue. All right, grab a cup of tea and let's travel through the ages of Teyvat together. Long ago, the Dragon King Nibelung created the Three Moons. It's unknown what stage of development the other dragons were in at that time, but Nibelung was always their mighty ruler, a being of immense power. We know very little about the role or power of the moons themselves. By the time dragons had reached an advanced stage of technology to the point they could even travel into space, they still weren't a fully spacefaring species. Only their leaders were capable of such journeys, while the rest remained grounded. Speaking of leaders, Teyvat was divided into 7 regions, each ruled by a dragon lord. Every dragon governed their own element and domain. Those elements will sound familiar to you: Animo, Geo, Electro, Dendro, Hydro, Pyro, and Cryo. However, the elements of that era were not exactly the same as the ones we know today. Apep, the ruler of the Dendro dragons, dwells in Sumeru. She governs the land and nurtures some of the oldest and most primal lifeforms beings known simply as Dendro lifeforms. During the era of the 7 sovereigns, the primordial sea lay upon the surface of the world. Most forms of life in Teyvat originated from that sea, blessed by its unique properties. The Hydro Dragon's sovereign was considered the beating heart that ruled over the primordial sea, the original god of life, since all living things in Teyvat were born from its depths. Because of this, it was sometimes called the waters of birth or fertile essence. Life within the primordial sea was more collective than individual, a unified consciousness rather than separate beings. From the primordial flame, the pyro dragon Lord Geocodal was born. On that same day, he separated a fragment of that flame to give birth to his younger brother Kukulkan. The legendary Tonatiuh was created to anchor the cable in Chichinuktoka, connecting Teyvat to realms beyond its heavens. Jai of Coetl carved out a vast space within the great volcano of Tallinn, which became the sacred city of Tallinn. The remains of a 4th moon, which failed to fully manifest, fell into the sea, eventually forming what is now known as the region of Nodkrai. Meanwhile, far across the endless cosmos, the dragons continued their own lives, unaware of the events that were about to unfold. In another corner of the universe, an unknown girl belonging to an unknown race slept aboard a starship within a capsule that allowed her soul to separate from her physical body. In that state, she and her companions traveled between worlds, gathering knowledge and observing the rise and fall of civilizations. They could be called the historians and philosophers of the cosmos, drifting through endless light years of solitude, mapping the fates of countless nations and species doomed to vanish, and pondering the higher truths of the universe. They lived as temporary residents of many worlds, always remaining hidden, never interfering, never contacting native life. They were simply observers, chroniclers of history. This was the life the girl led, until one day she noticed a brilliant star, shining far brighter than all the others. That star was Nibelung, the Dragon King of Teyvat. A faint light pierced the girl's consciousness, awakening her from a slumber that had lasted 10,000 years. Her wandering spirit returned instantly to her body. The light came from an unremarkable little world, sitting quietly on the edge of a spiral arm of the galaxy. That world was Teyvat, and the light she felt was the will of the primordial dragon Nibelung, burning brighter than any civilization she had ever encountered. The girl knew something terrible, a truth that would one day doom this world. In ancient artifacts, this knowledge is called the truth of the universe. It may be connected to the law of the universe, the same law that once turned the twins' homeworld into dust in an instant. The Voyager could not bear the thought of such a bright and noble will, Nibelung's will, perishing with his world. And so, driven by compassion, she descended upon Teyvat to meet the Dragon King himself.
I have seen how the endless end, like a spinning spindle, tears apart the shimmering threads of the star clusters. I have seen how the cold wave of chaos swallowed every song, turning good and evil alike into silence. My kind and merciful ruler, even after my words, do you still refuse to abandon your people? Leave this doomed world behind and journey with me.
In other words, she begged him to flee while there was still time. But the proud dragon answered,
"O traveler from distant worlds, thank you for revealing to me the truth of the universe. To you, my kin may seem ignorant and primitive, but to me, they are the very purpose of existence. If the wave of oblivion comes, let my bones become the fortress that shields this world. You shall witness the path I choose, for I will lead my people forward toward the stars."
The Voyager respected his decision. She became his friend and promised to return one day to see how Teyvat fared. No one knows how many centuries or perhaps even millennia passed after the girl departed from Teyvat. But since that day, the dragons advanced far beyond their past selves. The three moons performed their functions, their civilization flourished, and everything moved in harmony. Until it appeared in the sky. They called it by many names, but the dragons knew it as the Invader or the Usurper. It hatched from an egg and was androgynous, without a defined gender. It had wings and a humanoid form. Its purpose was simple: to seize control of Teyvat. The dragons, of course, did not welcome such an intruder. They prepared for war, led by their king, Nibelung. And the Invader, too, knew it would not be an easy conquest against a civilization as advanced as theirs. So it created 4 reflections of itself: the shadow of space Asmodi, the shadow of life Niberius, the shadow of death Renova, and the shadow of time Istaroth. The invasion of Teyvat lasted 40 long years. When the war finally ended, the Invader had triumphed. Those dragons who survived were cast down into the depths of the ocean. Nibelung was defeated just as the wandering girl had once foreseen. Yet the Dragon King refused to accept defeat. He left Teyvat, vowing to one day return and restore the rule of dragons. This era would later be known as the Reign of the First Throne. After the Great War, Teyvat lay in ruin. The Invader and its shadows began to reshape the world. They created what we now know as Irminsul, its roots spreading across the planet to protect it from cosmic threats. They also reshaped the land, giving birth to new flora and fauna. Among these creations were humans, granted everything they could desire. In time, people came to revere the Invader as the Primordial One, sometimes named Phanes, and later known as the Heavenly Principles. Around this era, Phanes also subdued the 3 lunar sisters, Aria, Sonnet, and Canon. He did not force them through power. The moons themselves longed to serve him. They called him their son, drawn to his divine light. Phanes then created the angels, who would guide and aid humankind. Human civilization blossomed: agriculture, poetry, and the first cultures appeared. People began settling new lands, and the first nations of Teyvat were born. Upon the lush green mountain near modern-day Mondstadt, there once stood the civilization of Sal Vindanyr. At its heart grew a great white tree, sacred to its people. Under its branches, a princess was born, blessed by her mother, the high priestess, with the gift of prophecy. One day, the princess dreamed of Durin, scattering poison across the land. The people feared that her dream was an omen, a curse upon their future. At some point, Celestia descended and anchored itself above the mountain. Today, we know this place as Dragonspine, though back then, it was untouched by dragons or frost. Far to the north, in what is now Nordkrai, the civilization of Hyperborea flourished, centered around their golden city, also the birthplace of the first angel. At that time, Sumeru was still free of deserts, slowly being settled by humankind. The people of Surumi Island also began to appear, establishing early communities. And across Inazuma, there was no Watatsumi Island yet. Instead, the ancient civilization of Enkanomiya thrived beneath the waves. Records also mention a lost civilization that once stood where the chasm now lies, though little is known about it. According to the Oceanids, Egeria was created by Niberius, the shadow of life, as the new heart of the primordial sea. Though she was created by the Lord of Humanity, her entire essence was born from Teyvat itself. As long as Egeria dwells within the primordial sea, no new hydro dragon can be born. And so, little by little, humans and Celestia continued to live in peace. When the Voyager finally returned, the world she once knew was unrecognizable. The bones of the earth, the dragons, were bound by 4 chains, forged by the 4 shadows of the Primordial One. The soft white light of the heavens had split into 7 unmoving hues, the 7 elements created by the primordial. The breath of the Dragon King had vanished. Like smoke, Nibelung was gone. And upon his throne now sat the Winged One, the primordial, bathed in the glow of the 3 moons. In other words, she had returned to Teyvat after the usurpation, after the Primordial One had conquered the world and overthrown Nibelung. The Wanderer was devastated by the dragon's disappearance, yet she did not wish to confront the new ruler. Instead, she chose to uncover the truth herself. Breaking the sacred law of her kind, she sealed her soul within the body of a mortal boy, taking on a new vessel in secret. That boy lived in the golden city of Hyperborea, located in the lands of modern-day Nodcry. Years later, the truth of the Heavenly Messenger's departure from the Golden City was finally revealed. The people had begun to doubt the heavens, questioning divine laws and seeking knowledge that was forbidden to mortals. Priests turned on one another, accusing their peers of blasphemy, sacrilege, and heresy, claiming they had abandoned the grace and wisdom of the gods. And so they searched for a scapegoat, someone to bear the weight of their collective guilt. It was his fault, they said. He poisoned the minds of the faithful and led us to doubt the divine. By sheer misfortune, or perhaps by fate, they found their scapegoat in an ordinary young man who had accidentally entered the council hall where the priests were gathered. He calmly refuted each of their accusations one by one, meeting their cries of heresy only with a silent, burning gaze. In him, the priests saw the embodiment of all the sins they feared. Thus, they decided to lay all blame upon this nameless youth. The high priest, crowned with a diadem woven from the white branches of Irminsul, ordered him to carry the wrath of the gods upon his shoulders, to descend into the depths of the earth, and stand before the divine envoys who dwelled beneath the roots of the silver tree, to beg for the forgiveness of the Golden City. And so, the boy whose body housed the soul of the Voyager set off into the deepest caverns of the world to meet the firstborn angel. There, beneath the roots of Irminsul, he asked her about the forbidden source of this world, the forbidden knowledge of creation itself. The question shocked and enraged the Shadow of Life, for she could not comprehend how a mere mortal could know of such a sacred, closely guarded secret. As the Shadow's fury rose, the Voyager revealed her true nature and origin, explaining how she possessed such knowledge. In that instant, the chains placed upon the Shadow of Life by the Primordial shattered like strands of spider silk. The Voyager had freed the first angel. For the first time, the angel understood what it meant to serve no one but herself. In gratitude and love for the one who had freed her, she revealed to the Voyager the deepest and most forbidden secrets of creation. Having learned the cruel truth about the world that the Primordial One had reshaped on Teyvat, the Voyager was consumed with fury. Her anger wasn't only because of the tragic fate that befell her friend Nibelung, but also because of the merciless laws established by the heavenly principles.
How pitiful that your master would cast such noble lives into ruin. Even the most bloodthirsty demons, who torment souls for pleasure, would recoil at such cruelty. O Maiden of Dawn, who has never known love, allow me to become the enemy of your laws. For the sake of every living being imprisoned by your master's will, raise your eyes to the stars. Let me be your blade, your shield, your guide, your accomplice, who shall never be forgiven.
Then she, the most noble of angels, leaned down and kissed the Voyager on the forehead. It was in that period that the War of Vengeance began. The first angel was the one who unleashed the war against the Primordial One, intent on punishing him for monstrous crimes against Teyvat, the dragons, and his own creations. They were united by a love unbound by law. It was a freedom attained one that the Primordial One would never tolerate. At the very moment when the heart of the angel was seized by an unfamiliar tremor, the eternal crown granted by the Primordial One cracked apart. Casting the fragments of the crown into the snow, the first angel made a vow to herself.
We shall rewrite these foolish laws with bone and ash. We shall feed barren lands with our blood. We shall build a city and a tower that will rise to the heavens, so that mortals will no longer weep or despair. I cast aside this useless crown, so that all nations may know freedom.
Uniting with the Golden City, which in ancient times was located on the territory of what is now Nodkrai, the first angel and humankind, using forbidden knowledge, began to create the so-called Alves. In the battle with the Voyager, the Primordial One received a very serious wound that weakened him. Nevertheless, he was victorious. After his victory, the Primordial One cast blue crystalline spikes upon the human kingdoms, and in a single night the magnificent Golden City was destroyed. In the end, the Alves screamed and turned into silvery, icy mist, and the first angel, who had betrayed the Lord of the Heavens, was punished, stripped of her name and her body. Her kin, the angels, were struck by a curse. If they ever dare, even once, to look into the eyes of some stranger and grant him alone the love meant for all creations, their divine beauty will melt upon the wind, their minds will turn to dust, and from their remains a fairy will emerge, one that will wander the world eternally and consume the pale shadows of memories. Thus came the exile of all angels from Celestia. The entire angelic race was punished for the first angel going against her creator. From that moment on, whenever angels began to feel love for someone, they would immediately turn into formless beings known as fairies. A skyfrost nail descends from the heavens, shrouding the city in clouds and snowstorms. One day, it shatters into 3 fragments, one of which transforms their white tree into the frost-bearing tree. At that time, an outlander named Imunlakar lives in the kingdom, and the princess gifts him a great sword made of star silver when he departs in search of answers. She promises to create a fresco for him, hoping for a reunion. The princess works on the fresco, while her father, a priest, sets out for the mountains to seek counsel. As the trees begin to wither, he hopes that the princess's third painting will depict melting snow, but unfortunately, she is unable to complete it. The Skyfrost nail breaks into 3 parts and then shatters even further, releasing 3 orbs that freeze specific locations, including shattering the white tree. The princess takes the most intact branch and attempts to graft it onto another tree, but it withers, and she dies beside it. Someone else arrives, attempting to heal the arteries of the land, but fails to do so and buries the princess. Imunlakar returns and discovers that everyone is dead. He keeps the great sword of star silver among the frescoes and then departs to wage war, having decided that Celestia cares only for bloodshed. There are also scribes' boxes left on Dragonspine, which speak of the time when the outlander, Imunlakar, departed, leaving the princess behind. The people around them discussed extensively the creation of a new nation without gods. Therefore, the creation of Khaenri'ah, at least ideologically, is attributed to the War of Vengeance. At the same time in Liu, the young Morax witnessed a chariot fall to the west of what is now the Dunyu ruins, forming a rift. In alternative versions of this legend, the solar chariot is not a literal chariot, but a star that fell into the area now known as the Chasm, and later returned to the sky of its own will during the Archon War. A Skyfrost nail, which is presumed to have been dropped during this period, is mentioned, but its connection to the solar chariot is unknown. The ancient civilization in this region was destroyed, and its inhabitants resettled in the Chenyu Vale. The Great War of Vengeance devastates both sky and land, leaving only a few islands behind. These islands are likely Narukami Island, Kanazuka, Yashiori Island, Seirai Island, and Surumi Island. The Thunderbird notices the mist-shrouded Surumi Island and decides to settle there. At some point, objects fall from the sky, possibly Skyfrost nails, one of which lands on Surumi Island. This temporarily disperses the fog, but later the mist returns with even greater force, and the first civilization comes to an end. Nearby, the people of Enkonomia sink beneath the earth. Apep joins Nibelung in the Great War of Vengeance against the Heavenly Principles. Nabu Malikata survives the fall of the angelic race. A desert appears, created from a skyfrost nail cast upon Sumeru. The Great War of Vengeance devastates Natlan and damages its ley lines. Jiyu Kotal awakens after Nibelung returns to Teyvat. The Lady of the Night restores Natlan's ley lines in the form of the Night Kingdom, under the guidance of Renova. After that, a Skyfrost nail falls into the Night Kingdom. After the war ended, not a single place in Teyvat remained untouched by destruction. Almost all civilizations that had lived on the planet sank to the bottom of the ocean, where the planet's former rulers, the dragons, dwelt at that time. The Primordial One himself was gravely wounded, and he decided to hand over the reins of governance to his Shades, while he withdrew to tend to his injuries. The Shades did not come to Teyvat without reason. They convened when Teyvat was threatened by danger, discussing how to resolve each crisis. At that moment, life in Teyvat was hanging by a thread. After the world began to recover from the cataclysms associated with the War of Vengeance, the ancient civilization in the area of Windwale Highland founded Cecilia Garden, where these flowers were cultivated in greenhouses. Judging by the architecture and the style of the decorative elements of the ruins surrounding Cecilia Garden, it was likely built by Decarabian or representatives of his civilization. However, at present, there is no textual evidence linking Cecilia Garden to Decarabian's Mondstadt. During this same period, the ancient civilization on Starsnatch Cliff created the Summer Garden. At some point, Boreas, known as the King of the North Wind, received his power from an ancient god and himself became a deity. Decarabian founded his capital, Mondstadt, in the area now known as Stormterror's Lair. The canyon was once filled with Decarabian soldiers, guarding the entrance to the city. The city itself was built in a circular form around Decarabian's tower, and the inhabitants were assigned their own places within the city. According to legend, the first Oceanid was born after Agaria shed the first tear, which later gave life to all other Oceanids. Agaria instructed the Oceanids to seek to understand the diversity of species and to love every creature. In order to fulfill Ageria's wish to unite everyone in the world, the Oceanids scattered throughout the waters of Teyvat to act as spies. Some Oceanids, having observed and envied human life, soon wished to live on the surface. Unwilling to deny her followers, Agaria decided to grant their request by taking water from the primordial sea and infusing it into the Oceanids' blood vessels, thus creating humanoid forms for them so that they could walk upon the land. The Shades of the Primordial One who watch over Teyvat deemed Agaria's act of life a sin and sentenced her to imprisonment for her crimes. At some point, the people of Fontaine learn of a prophecy stating that the water level will rise, and that in the end, the inhabitants of Fontaine will dissolve in order to wash away their sins, returning to what they once were. Somewhere west of Mondstadt, Morax descends into the region of Liu, where he raises Mount Tianheng, calms the seas, and lowers the tides. To pacify the seas, he defeats many sea monsters, including a beast known as Baxiu. The karst formations of Juyun were created in this manner at an unknown point in time, when water was pumped into an underground reservoir. Guizhong, the Lord of Dust, befriends Morax. At some point, she and her people relocate to the north of Mount Tianheng for unknown reasons. Morax and Guizhong establish the Gili Assembly, a name derived from the first character of Guizhong's name, and one character from Morax's name, using his name at the time, which is unknown. This civilization stretched across the lands between Mount Tianheng and Stonegate. It was extraordinarily prosperous, developing through agriculture and mining, and became a major market center. Guizhong sets down 4 commandments to guide her people. To unite in aspiration is to be steadfast and unchanging forever. Wisdom is like water. It nourishes all who accept it, and within it truth is reflected. Strengthen the bones, so that movement may be flexible when the time comes. Virtue grows tall like a tree, and even if there is shadow, it will flourish eternally. Guizhong and Cloud Retainer, among other adepti, create the Guizhong Balliste to defend the Guili Assembly from external threats. Khaenri'ah, the goddess of salt, establishes her dominion in Liyue. The original boundaries of her territory are unknown, but it included the Saltire. She was known for her gentleness and kindness, but also for her weakness. There is a theory that the tradition of wedding flower balls in Liyue may originate from Khaenri'ah distributing bouquets of flowers to her followers. A village is founded on Wu Wang Hill. It existed in relative peace until Liyue Harbor was established, after which the enchanting song of a whale-like sea monster led all the village's young people to their deaths, and the elders died as well, leaving no one to continue the village. As an avatar of Irminsul, the Greater Lord Rukkhadevata appears to have emerged at some point in the distant past. According to legend, King Deshret was a son of the sky, but he was born after the fall of the angel race and the Moon Sisters, and learned of their history only from an unknown woman, likely Nabu Malikata or Rukkhadevata. 3,700 years ago, the Shades grant the opportunity to contend for the 7 divine thrones, which leads to a fierce struggle among the gods for power. A god's heart, or a gnosis, is the divine remains of grieving gods. These are unrealized ideals, visions for the prosperity of humanity that were never able to be brought into existence. During the Archon War, internecine conflicts between gods were only one of the causes of the strife in Teyvat. Other beings and entities also sought to expand their domains, taking advantage of the chaos to invade the continent. 4,000 years ago, Shao was born, though his true name remains unknown to this day. An evil god discovers his weakness and exploits it to enslave him, forcing him to commit cruel and violent acts. During one of the battles of the Archon War, they encounter Morax, who defeats the evil god and frees the enslaved Adeptus, granting him the name Shao as protection. After this, Shao becomes one of the Yakshas to repay Morax for his salvation, and in this role he is known by the name Alatus. 3,700 years ago, a singular battle takes place at the Gili Assembly. Despite this nation being under the protection of Morax, Guizhong, and the Adepti, the battle devastates the Gili plains and triggers landslides that transform the Luhua pool from a fertile oasis into a marshland. Guizhong perishes during these events. The exact cause of her death is unknown. More than 10 days later, after the fall of the Gili Assembly, Morax, Marchosius, and the Adepti lead their people south of Mount Tianheng, where they found Liyue Harbor. Morax enters into a contract with the Adepti for its protection. The Millelith is established to defend the people and repel monster attacks. Morax teaches his people to build houses, using Mora to create a model home. He also introduces minted Mora as Liyue's currency for convenience. After the founding of Liyue Harbor, Morax decides to wage war against the other gods, believing it to be the only way to restore order and protect humanity. He sought the order of the heavens to halt the tide of chaos. The Adepti gathered at his side. The Yaksha guardians surged forward. Frightened by the valiant people, demons fled. I do not desire dominion, but I cannot stand by and watch the common folk suffer. 3,000 years ago, Ganyu was born during the Archon War. She later takes part in the war to defend Liyue Harbor, entering into a contract with Morax. There is no precise record of her birth date. However, based on the wording of her third character story, it can be inferred that Ganyu may have lived during the era of the Gili Assembly. During one battle, Ganyu, who was much stronger at the time, unintentionally strangled a monster that underestimated her size and attempted to eat her. This incident led her to adhere to a strict diet to maintain a slender figure. 2,000 years ago, Morax hears the pleas of Ajdaha, a blind geo-dragon dwelling beneath the mountains of Nantianmen. Taking pity on him, Morax brings the dragon to the surface and restores his sight with a single touch. They enter into a contract whereby Ajdaha agrees not to threaten humanity in exchange for the right to live beside him. Thereafter, Ajdaha aids Morax in battles across Teyvat. Morax defeats many gods and sea monsters in the Gion Stone Forest, including the ancient god Osiel, hurling enormous stone spears to pin them to the ocean floor and using seals of permission to seal them away. The resulting stone formation, when viewed from above, takes on the overall shape of his own geo-symbol. 2,000 years ago, having subdued all other gods in his region, Morax becomes the Geo-Archon, restoring peace to the land now known as Liyue. 2,600 years ago, Boreas declares war on D-Carabian, yet does not inflict a single scratch upon Mondstadt. The war between the two kings of Ice and Frost reaches a stalemate, and Decarabian's people begin to view his rule as despotic and tyrannical. A boy known only as the Nameless Bard befriends a tiny, insignificant wind spirit, who would later become Barbatos. The boy dreamed of seeing birds in flight, green grass, and a world beyond the city. The clan, now known as the Gunhildr clan, once lived in Mondstadt. However, Gunhildr's father, the clan's chieftain, grew disillusioned with Decarabian's despotic rule and led his people out of the city. Outside the city lay only merciless cold and engulfing blizzards, and the clan struggled to survive. When they prayed for salvation, the wind spirit, who would later be known as Barbatos, answered their prayers, and the Shade of Time, Istaroth, heard them and gave life to the small wind spirit Barbatos. The clan's faith in the spirit granted him power, bestowing additional abilities that he used to create a refuge for them. Decarabian's people rise up in rebellion under the leadership of the Nameless Bard and Barbatos, then known as an elf or wind spirit. Decarabian is slain in the battle, as are Amos and the Nameless Bard. With Decarabian's death, Barbatos himself ascends to divine status. He uses his newfound power to create a vessel in the form of the Nameless Bard, and takes up a bow in honor of Amos. For reasons unknown, the red-haired warrior turns away from Barbatos, and his name is eventually forgotten by the people of Mondstadt, though his deeds are still remembered. In time, he starts a family, which later gives rise to Rangvindr and the Rangvindr clan. In Old Mondstadt, the Windbloom was used as a code word among the resistance, and the red-haired warrior was among the first to use this code word. Leonard, an adventurer, invents the Wind Glider. His goal in life is to conquer Mount Pylos, but he fails and is forced to turn back. He writes the book On Mountains and Seas as an account of his journey. Using his powers, Barbatos reshapes Mondstadt, using his winds to blow away the snow and ice covering the land, thereby terraforming the Mondstadt region. Among the most notable changes to Mondstadt's landscape was the destruction of Mount Pylos. He then leads his people away from Decarabian's old city and resettles them near Cider Lake, where they build the modern city of Mondstadt. Boreas realizes that his blizzards cannot nurture life, and decides that, given his powers and his disillusionment with human society, he has no right to become one of the 7 Archons. He allows his physical body to die, channeling his power into the land of Mondstadt to nourish it. Despite losing his original physical form, Boreas' spirit remains alive, and his power is still strong enough for him to materialize a body of ice and wind. Istaroth worked together with Barbatos to protect Mondstadt, and both were revered by the people of Mondstadt as the Wind of Time, with the belief that Anemo brings stories and time nurtures them. However, at some point, the worship of Istaroth and most records of her disappeared and were forgotten. 2,000 years ago, the twin gods, Makoda and Ea, slay all other gods, conquer many races, and unite all the islands of Inazuma. Ea, though, the stronger warrior, believes Makoto to be better suited for the role of Archon and sacrifices her body so that Makoto may ascend to Celestia. Makoto becomes the first Electro-Archon, the god of eternity. 2,000 years ago, Orobashi flees from an unknown region to the land of Byaku Yakoku, namely the Serpent's Bowels. He remains there for some time until a child from the subterranean land finds him and asks him to become their god. Together, they fight against the rule of the Sun's Son and emerge victorious, after which he becomes known as Orobashi no Mikoto and Watatsumi Omikami, the great god of the oceans. 3,000 years ago, Nabu Malikata, the greater lord Rukkhadevata, and King Deshret become friends, and come to be known as the God Kings of Sumeru. At some point, Nabu Malikata foresees the approach of a cataclysm. She creates a fragment of Kvarna and entrusts it to Rukkhadevata. Rukkhadevata transforms the fragment into the divine bird Simurgh, and tasks Simurgh with guarding the boundary between new birth and death. Nabu Malikata, King Deshret, and Rukkhadevata, together known as the 3 God Kings of Sumeru, built Ai Khanum, the city of amphitheaters. Its name means City of the Moon Maiden in the ancient language of the Jinn. It is said that Nabu Malikata maintained friendly relations with the Jinn. According to some legends, King Deshret captured the Jinn in magical bottles marked with his seal, although the Jinn were also his willing servants in his campaign to conquer the world. he created Ai-Khanum as a city for the Jinn, and they in turn created the entrance to King Deshret's mausoleum. Nabu Malikata dies due to the malice of the scorching sun and yellow sand, and the city of Ai-Khanum is seemingly swallowed by a sandstorm and subsequently abandoned. Nabu Malikata desired a spectacular death so that the bitterness of her demise would preserve her legacy forever. King Deshret, who was in love with her, never realized this, which led him to an obsession with the shared vision once held by the three god kings. The promised land of Valavia is buried beneath the desert sands, which may correspond to Ai-Khanum. After Nabu Malikata's death, King Deshret and Rukkhadevata parted ways to create their own civilizations. After separating from King Deshret, Rukkhadevata travels east of the Great Desert and creates the Varuna device, transforming part of the desert into a tropical rainforest. At the boundary between the forest and the desert, the Wall of Samiel is erected to prevent the forest from turning into desert. After the creation of the forest labyrinth, from the reflection of the moon upon the water is born the Lord of the Forest, Viagara, taking the form of a tiger. With the help of her followers who later founded the Sumeru Academia, Rukkhadevata creates a flourishing rainforest. The city of Sumeru is built upon the Divine Tree, an especially massive tree located in Sumeru's forest region, and the sages of the Academia assist Rukkhadevata in governing the affairs of the nation. Rukkhadevata also creates the Aranara, small, plant-like beings capable of controlling dreams. Thousands of years ago, Rukkhadevata briefly returns to the desert to help save the people of King Deshret from the consequences of forbidden knowledge and creates the Akasha system to combat it by uniting the wisdom of the people. However, this endeavor drains much of her power and reduces her to the size of a child. However, even this proved insufficient. In the end, Deshret sacrificed himself to finally put an end to it. The civilization of King Deshret fell and fragmented into many small human-ruled city-states, while Rukkhadevata became the first Dendro Archon and ascended the throne. The vassal city-state of Gurabad arose after the death of Nabu Malikata, during the period known as the Age of Vassal States. The history of Gurabad is first mentioned in connection with the vassal king Ormuzd Shah. Ormuzd had 300 relatives, one of whom was Shireen, a half-Jinni, the daughter of Ormuzd and the primal fairy Lilupar. Lilupar's 3 prophecies and 3 warnings would later lead to the ultimate destruction of Gurabad. Sometime after the fall of Gurabad and Sumeru, Remus arrives upon the open sea in search of a place where he might die. There he accidentally discovers the ruins of a forgotten city and encounters the city's only surviving inhabitants, Sybil, a former envoy entrusted with guarding the Irminsul, and the other golden bees. They foretell that Remus was destined to come here, that he would found a new flourishing nation, and that this nation's pursuit of justice would ultimately bring about its downfall. Remus's reluctant acceptance of his fate causes the Irminsul to transform into a golden ship, which they used to establish the empire of Remuria upon the waters. Remus's reign was prosperous, entering history as Fontaine's Golden Age and Great Symphony. Remus is credited with helping his people develop agriculture, construct gigantic cities and temples, and spread the beauty of music and the arts. To realize his dream of a harmonious, enlightened civilization, he invokes Fortuna to call upon other tribes to join the empire of Remuria, and conquers all tribes that refuse to do so, such as the tribe from which Aranes and Cassiodor originated. Having transformed Remuria into a thriving civilization, Remus, anxious for its future, begins to seek a way to avert the destruction foretold by Sybil. Though she deems this futile, stating that the rise and fall of civilizations is the law of Fortuna, she directs him toward Egeria, imprisoned in the depths of the Primordial Sea, as a possible solution. Scylla, guardian of Egeria's prison, attacks him, and they battle for 30 days and 30 nights. Their eventual exhaustion grants Remus the chance to explain the reason for his arrival. Bewildered by Remus's seemingly meaningless dream, Scylla permits him to meet Egeria. To Remus's dismay, his meeting with Egeria bears no fruit, for Fontaine's fate had already been determined by her original sin, the creation of a new race of humans through the power of the Primordial Sea. Egeria gives Remus a goblet of primordial water, which he intends to use to create a world of endless prosperity, a world without conflict. Intrigued by Remus's ideals, Scylla chooses to leave the Primordial Sea and join his cause. Remus believes that as long as the harmonious symphony of prosperity continues to resound, Remuria will flourish forever. He sets about perfecting his civilization, devoting particular attention to the capital, Capitolium. Hoping to save the peoples of Remuria from the coming flood, he mixes primordial water with the Stone of Immortality to create golden ichor, meant to contain the souls and minds of his people. He places this soul-filled ichor into golems, and then attempts to replace all primordial water with his golden ichor. Sometime after turning his people to stone, Remus creates the Great Symphony using Sybil's life. Phobos inherits Sybil's lack of an independent self, or will. All of his actions are directed solely toward making people happy. Phobos begins to fulfill the people's desires for bloodshed, knowing that all will obey his commands, as disobedience is considered tantamount to betrayal. The Remurians grow ever more arrogant and bloodthirsty, believing this to be the will of their emperor. Seeing the extent of their moral decay, Remus secretly conspires with Scylla to destroy Phobos. Scylla leads an army of Vishaps into Capitolium as part of Remus's plan. Remus perishes, unleashing the power of the symphony. Harmos Boethius, deeming this retreat an act of betrayal, steals the golden ichor and uses it to seal the dragon Scylla along with chains forged by Harmost Evergidia. Remuria and its people sink beneath the waters at the very moment the dragon is sealed. The golden ichor is eventually corroded by the Primordial Sea, and the survivors once more degenerate into barbarians and destroyers. After Remuria is destroyed and sinks deep beneath the waters, Celestia commands Egeria to return from her primordial prison to take Remus's place and rule Fontaine. Egeria returns to Fontaine, gathers the survivors, mediates their disputes, and instructs them to found new cities around the present water sources, thus ushering in an era governed by law that continues to this day. She receives a gnosis, ascends as the Hydro Archon, and becomes one of the seven. Human civilization in Natlan collapses and is conquered by a dragon civilization ruled by the Pyro sovereign Xiucoatl. Most of Natlan's fairies are devoured by the dragons. Natlan does not take part in the Archon War, instead, it is consumed by internal conflicts among the dragons. As a result, the modern inhabitants of Natlan know very little about the Archon War. Aha is sealed within ancient ruins for unknown reasons. The dragon civilization gradually declines, and Kukulkan foresees its inevitable end. He bestows the power of phlogiston upon primitive humans, reviving their civilization. He also creates his son, Och Khan, a half-dragon, half-human, intending for him to unite humans and dragons and ascend the throne of a new era. Toward the end of this era, the 7 tribes of Natlan are founded. Their religion includes the worship of ancestors, Weobs, and the Night Realm. At some point, the dragon civilization ruled by the Ishlel dragon falls into decline. Xiucoatl modifies one of his disciples to serve as the control core for Huitzilopochtli. Around 2,000 years ago, Expelank becomes Natlan's first Pyro Archon after slaying the Lord of Flame, Xiucoatl. Expelank and Kukulkan each take one of Xiucoatl's eyes, swearing to preserve peace between humans and dragons. Expelank borrows the power of Ronova to establish a system of rules for mortal humans, allowing them to ascend as the Pyro Archon, as well as the Ode of Resurrection. Around 2,000 years ago, the White King becomes the first Cryo Archon. A few thousand years ago, Khaenri'ah is ruled by the Crimson Moon Dynasty. At some point, the Crimson Moon Dynasty is replaced by the Eclipse Dynasty as the ruling house of Khaenri'ah. Piringhedi arrives in Khaenri'ah from another world and is taken in by an orphanage. Piringheri eventually becomes one of the most powerful figures in the kingdom, known as Piringheri the Invincible. At some point, the development of field tillers, ruin guards, and other machines now known as ruin machines begins, likely for the purpose of opposing Celestia. Around 2,000 years ago, a diplomatic delegation from Khaenri'ah, including Ugura and Ushima, travels to Enkanomiya. The delegation attempts to steal the Forbidden Book before Sun and Moon, but the attempt fails thanks to Ante, who manages to destroy their ruin guard at the cost of his own life. 2,600 years ago, Dvalin, an elemental dragon, is born from pure anemo energy in the high heavens. The birth of an elemental dragon is a rare phenomenon, and such dragons are equal in power to gods. Historically, they have clashed with ancient gods. However, Barbatos befriends Dvalin, and the dragon becomes the first of the four winds, revered by humanity. Around 2,000 years ago, the Hexenzirkel challenges Barbatos to combat, but he refuses and instead proposes resolving the conflict through song. From then on, they become allies, and Barbatos agrees to conceal one of the group's meeting places and its lantern. 1,500 years ago, Barbatos departs, and a class of aristocrats endowed with divine power becomes the rulers of Mondstadt. The aristocratic houses trace their lineage back to heroes who lived in Mondstadt's early ages under Barbatos. Notable houses include House Lawrence, House Gunhildr, and House Immunlacher. Around 1,000 years ago, the dragon Ursa begins to terrorize Mondstadt. House Lawrence becomes the dominant clan in Mondstadt and the city's primary rulers. However, they grow corrupt and degenerate, eventually becoming tyrants who enslave and brutalize the common people, viewing themselves as lords and kings. House Gunhildr is said to have preserved its honor, but was less influential than House Lawrence, which ruled Mondstadt. The status and fate of House Immunlacher are unknown, while the other aristocratic clans followed the example set by House Lawrence. The aristocracy employed various methods to control the populace and keep them in ignorance. Anyone who posed a threat to their rule was enslaved and used for labor or entertainment. Knowledge of the past was suppressed, and cultural and historical relics that could point to the truth were destroyed. The knightly order of that era, calling themselves the Knights of the Starlit Sky, served the aristocracy and upheld its decadence, using their strength to oppress the common people. The royal mages no longer instilled virtue in the nobility, instead helping them keep the people ignorant. The church likewise used its influence to justify the actions of the aristocracy and prevent the common folk from understanding the truth. The Church of Favonius undergoes a schism, with the high clergy supporting the nobility. Vanessa and her younger sister Lind are born into the Muraton tribe of the Southern Plains, exiled from Natland due to a civil war in their homeland. After an encounter with the dragon Ursa and several days of starvation, she and her people flee to Mondstadt, where they are enslaved by the aristocracy. Because of her immense strength, Vanessa is made into a gladiator, bound in chains. The chains themselves could not restrain her. As a child of Murata, she believed that the ordinary ores of Mondstadt and the absence of her homeland's divine flame rendered such metals insignificant before her strength. Her submission was explained by her sense of responsibility toward her people. 1,000 years ago, the troupe known as the Wandering Ensemble is founded, composed of people from across Teyvat. It was both a musical troupe and a paramilitary organization, earning the nickname the Swordsman Troupe during its travels across the continent. At some point, they encountered an unknown enemy in the Sea of Ash and made their final stop in the city of Mondstadt. They attempted to overthrow the aristocracy but failed, and most of the troupe's members were killed in battle, subsequently enslaved, or forced to flee. Afterward, an awakened bard, the Anemo Archon, came to Venice's aid, helped overthrow the rule of the aristocracy, and then disappeared once more. 1,000 years ago, Azdaha begins to forget those around him, his memories gradually eroding. Morax attempts to help him repair his deteriorating memory, but the solution fails. Azdaha becomes increasingly irritable, and his spirit, for unknown reasons, naturally turns wrathful. The people of Liyue mine the mountains excessively, overexploiting the region's resources. This causes disturbances in the ley lines, bringing immense suffering to Azdaha, who is nourished and sustained by their energy. The pain, combined with his inability to recognize those close to him, drives him into a rage, and he attacks the workers in the chasm, seeking to end his torment. In the process, he destroys the settlement in Tiancho Valley. Through Morax's efforts, Azdaha is sealed within a pocket dimension at Nantianmen. 1,500 years ago, a boy named Ru is born among the people of Surumi Island and is prepared to take part in rituals dedicated to the Thunderbird. During a song rehearsal, the Thunderbird hears him and is captivated by the sound of his voice. Ru attempts to befriend the goddess and gives her the name Kana Kapatsir, as the Thunderbird had forgotten her own name. They promise to meet again in the future. However, as conditions on the island worsen, and many islanders leave, never to return something the remaining people take as a sign of their deaths, though they had in fact settled on other islands of Inazuma, Ru voluntarily offers himself as a sacrifice, believing it would please the Thunderbird and bring the missing people back. Instead, she is enraged upon witnessing his death, viewing his sacrifice as the murder of the innocent and a broken promise, and takes revenge by devastating the land and slaughtering the entire tribe. In order to hear Ru's singing once more, she uses her power to induce a disturbance in the ley lines, causing the entire island to eternally relive the day of its destruction. After this, the Thunderbird flies to Khaenri'ah Island. Sometime after arriving on Khaenri'ah Island, Kana Kapatsir is tracked down and slain by Raiden A as a monster who regarded the Thunderbird as an obstacle to progress. The remnants of her power are sealed within Ase's shrine, where they form a mass of regret known as the Thunder Manifestation. Protective wards are placed across the island, including at Ase's shrine, to contain the Thunderbird's power. Aegeria exiles all criminals from her country who live in poverty as they are rejected by society. Eventually, some of these criminals beg for forgiveness, and Aegeria hears them through the waters. Aegeria grants their wish for redemption by ordering them to guard her secret, the entrance to the Primordial Sea beneath the waves. As a result, the fortress of Meropide is built, where prisoners live and guard the path to the Primordial Sea. However, over time, this secret is eventually forgotten. 2,000 years ago, the followers of Expelanque founded the Eternal Empire of Oshkanatlan. When a powerful enemy attacked Ochkanatlan, Expelanque sacrificed his life to save it by entering the sacred flame. After his death, Okan became his successor. The 7 tribes formed the Great Union, transferring their authority into the hands of Ochkan. Okan builds Okanatlan upon the ruins of Chichen Uktak. Ishlel initially assists him but resists when he lures her into the old core of Chulel and attempts to force her to power his city with her energy. Okan uses his dragon half to create a new core of Chulel, one that he can fully control. Okan continues to disdain the commandments left to him by Expelanque and earns the epithet Tyrant. He becomes obsessed with the extermination of dragons and their descendants, the Zaurians, abuses his people, and forbids worship of the ancestors and the Night Realm. A young man with scarlet eyes is among those who sympathize with the Zaurians. He is exiled by an elder in order to help him avoid capture. During his exile, he becomes the second Pyro Archon, succeeding Expelanque, and later begins recruiting those who oppose Okan. Ochkanatlan descends into a civil war in which the Muritans support Ochkan, while the other 6 tribes support the young man with scarlet eyes. Ochkan is overthrown by the young man with scarlet eyes and his supporters, after which Ochkanatlan is abandoned and cursed. Okan survives by separating his mind from his body, placing his mind into the heart of Chulel, while his body becomes the dragon of the city of Flowing Ash. 1,600 years ago, the then Pyro Archon Murata holds martial arts tournaments between the tribes of Natlan. 1,000 years ago, Kachanina, an ancient Pyro Archon, expels the Lord of Volcanoes from the people of the Springs. 530 years ago, Arundolin, Rostam, and Rosaline Krushka Lohefalter are born. 500 years ago, Arundolin and his childhood friend Rostam grow up together in Mondstadt and eventually both join the Knights of Favonius. Arundolin becomes the Grand Master, known as the Lion of Light, while Rostam becomes the Wolf Pup. Rostam received the title of Wolf Pup at the age of 27. He preferred to do the dirty work from the shadows, without the restrictions imposed by knighthood, so that Arundolin could remain an exemplary knight. It is said that he continued to lead a secret society founded around 500 years ago by Croislid. Rostam taught the Knights of Favonius his swordsmanship style, which is still used to this day. Arundolin's combat style, wielding a claymore in one hand and a longsword in the other, required immense strength that few could replicate, and thus soon disappeared. 500 years ago, Rostam and Rosaline fall in love. Shortly before the Cataclysm, Rosalind leaves Mondstadt to study at the Sumeru Academia. Morag signs a contract with an unknown party, agreeing not to disclose what will occur during the Cataclysm. Of the 5 Yakshas, only Bosacius and Elatus remain. Before losing his sanity, Bosacius wished to seal away his treasure and bring an end to this world. After Bosacius goes mad and abandons his post, he is drawn to a conflict in the Abyss and departs to fight there. Eventually, Elatus Xiao becomes the only known Yaksha remaining in this world. 530 years ago, a samurai named Yanagibashi Takuto accidentally arrives at the Mikawa Flower Festival. Kitsune Yae Miko is born in the lands of Hakushin. Eventually, she moves to the Grand Narukami Shrine due to her admiration for Kitsune Saigu. Ei and Makoto attend the Mikawa Flower Festival, as do Kitsune Saigu and Yae Miko. Mikoshi Nagamasa is adopted into the Mikoshi clan by Oni Mikoshi Chiyo. Asase Hibiki moves from Asase Shrine to the Grand Narukami Shrine to undergo training. Asase, Hibiki, Mikoshi, Nagamasa, and Kamuna Harunosuke train under the Yogo Tengu and later become known as the Yogo Trio. Hibiki studies true magic under the Tengu. Takamine, the Mist Splitter, challenges the Great Tengu to a duel, which ends in a draw. In exchange for the Tengu's bow, Thundering Pulse, Takamine becomes her retainer for several years and takes up residence at the Grand Narukami Shrine. He studies their arts of archery and swordsmanship and himself becomes a renowned swordsman. Feeling that his skill in archery would go to waste, he teaches Hibiki his techniques. Kitsune Urakusai writes the original Chronicle of the 6 Kitsune. Urakusai does something that greatly angers Kitsune Saigu, and she banishes him. What exactly he did is no longer clear, but it may be related to the Abyss's invasion of Teyvat during the Cataclysm. After Urakusai's exile, Kitsune Saigu leaves the Grand Narukami Shrine for Tenshukaku, preparing for the Abyss's assault. Knowing that she cannot oppose a deity, Egeria did not wish for her followers to be harmed because of the prophecy. She appoints Focalors, one of her Oceanid followers, as her successor, hoping that she might devise a plan to deceive Celestia. 520 years ago, Dainsleif is born. Aether and Lumine arrive in Teyvat while traveling between different worlds aboard their cosmic vessel, after their homeworld is destroyed. They crash and lose consciousness upon impact, becoming separated from one another. One twin awakens first and wanders Teyvat in desperate search of the other. After some time, they arrive in Khaenri'ah. King Airman proclaims the twin his heir and savior, who will save the people of Khaenri'ah from all calamities and lead them to a great future. 500 years ago, Piero is unable to stop Ermin and the sages from tearing open the veil of sin. This leads to the destruction of Khaenri'ah at the hands of the shadows of the Primordial. Monsters of the Abyss invade the surface world of Teyvat, spreading devastation everywhere. The people of Teyvat attribute the emergence of these monsters to one of the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah, Gold Rhinodaughter. Her creations, the Rift Hounds, become the vanguard of the abyssal forces. The kingdom of Khaenri'ah is destroyed by the shadows of Phanes, leading to the fall of the Eclipse dynasty and the collapse of the entire civilization. The destruction of Khaenri'ah triggers a devastating chain reaction. The 7 intervene in the events of Khaenri'ah after the Abyss invades Teyvat. The twin witnesses the Cataclysm and the gods destroying Khaenri'ah. The twin has a chance to save Khaenri'ah, but at that moment encounters Deraded, who presents the hibernation key as proof of their meeting. After making a difficult decision and leaving Khaenri'ah to its fate, the twin finds the other in their hibernation chamber and awakens them. The twins immediately attempt to leave, but are stopped by Asmodee. In a final desperate attempt to escape, the twins engage Asmodee in battle, manifesting wings and special swords. The twins are defeated, and Asmodee first seals one twin in a cube, and then the other. The traveler falls asleep again inside the cube for the next 500 years. During the Cataclysm, the Knights of Favonius, led at the time by Grandmaster Arundel and Rostam, set out on an expedition to Khaenri'ah to fight the monsters. Rostam was the mentor of a man known as the White Knight, possibly Roland, who loved justice above all else and fought the monsters of Khaenri'ah. Battling them, he became known as the Blood-Stained Knight, and people began to fear him. He then ventures deeper into Khaenri'ah and dies fighting the monsters. In the depths of the world, he learns the origin of the monsters that destroyed Khaenri'ah and of the greatest injustice that turned the people of Khaenri'ah into monsters, after which he joins the Abyss Order. The alchemist of Khaenri'ah, Gold Rinna daughter, creates one of her masterpieces, Durin. She sends Durin and other beings she created to the continent of Teyvat to display their beauty. However, upon reaching Mondstadt, Durin devastates the city, though it is believed that he was unaware of his actions until Dvalin dealt him a mortal wound in their battle. At that time, there was no Knight of the Lion's Fang, as Arundilin, the then Grand Master of the Ordo Favonius and the Lion of the South, had ceased fighting after his friend Rostam died during the expedition to Khaenri'ah. As a result, there was no one strong enough to confront Durin. The people's cries for help were heard by the Anemo Archon, who summoned Dvalin. Together, they entered into battle with Durin and ultimately defeated him, but Dvalin absorbed Durin's poisonous blood, which had been corrupted by the power of the Abyss. To recover, Dvalin took refuge in Decarabian's tower in Old Mondstadt and fell into a deep slumber. Rosaline Krushka Lohefalter returns to Mondstadt and learns of Rostam's death. In a surge of rage and despair, she uses the art of liquid flame she learned at the Sumeru Academia to transform her body into living fire and avenge him. Thus, she becomes known as the Crimson Witch of Flames. Two known locations that were heavily affected by the Cataclysm are the Chasm and the Dunyu Ruins. A metal meteorite fell into the chasm, and monsters poured forth from it. In response, Morax dispatched the Millelith to defend the area and evacuate the miners. One of the nameless Yakshas, who had once abandoned his duty to protect Liyue, returned to fight alongside the Millelith. The Yaksha and the Millelith who chose to lead the vanguard ultimately perished in battle. The monster threat was halted through the combined efforts of the Yaksha Bosacius, a mortal thaumaturge named Boyang, and the Millelith vanguard. They devised a strategy to lure and seal the monsters deep within the chasm using the fantastic compass, a catalyst capable of manipulating space. At the critical moment of the battle, Bosacius, Boyang, and the Millelith vanguard sacrificed themselves, sealing themselves together with the monsters, as the compass required a constant flow of energy from both a mortal and an adeptus to function. There were very few survivors of the conflict in the chasm. One of them was Junzao, Boyang's brother, but he lost his sanity after returning to his family. Another was a Millelith who lost all 4 limbs while saving miners and fighting monsters, but later taught himself medicine and became a renowned physician. After receiving a vision, he erected a monument to his fallen Millelith comrades. What happened in the Dunyu ruins is unknown, but its inhabitants chose to abandon the city and relocate to Liu Harbor. Neither the refugees nor the Adepti spoke of what had occurred there. It is said that the reason people left the Dunyu ruins and why it became ruins was the growing influence of the Abyss. The Dunyu ruins may have been a consequence of the main conflict in the chasm, as Bosacius ordered a Millelith detachment to hold the line at all costs within 60 miles of the chasm. This may indicate that the nearest location, the Dunyu ruins, was also affected by waves of monsters emerging from the chasm. Kujo Shigeyori constructs a fortress and establishes Kujo encampment on the front line in Kanazuka. Takamine the Mistsplitter and Mikoshi Chiyo were among those who fought alongside A, who acted as the Raiden Shogun against the dark forces that emerged during the Cataclysm. Takamine, despite his firm resolve to return to Asace Hibiki, is eventually consumed by monsters and disappears. Chiyo completely swallows a beast of sin with the body of a tiger and the head of a serpent. Although she manages to tear the creature apart from within, she becomes tainted by its profound sin. Chiyo attacks A with her sword, but is defeated and forced to flee. This act of betrayal stains the reputation of the Mikoshi clan. Over time, the story of Chiyo who bit the tiger is distorted into the tale of Tora Chiyo, a male lieutenant of Baal. Kitsune Saigu is consumed by dark forces, and most of her memories dissolve into corruption. The untainted remnants of her memories eventually manifest as Hanachiru Sato. During the destruction of Khaenri'ah, Makoto leaves A behind to protect Inazuma and travels to Khaenri'ah alone, where she is killed. When A arrives, she finds Makoto dying in her arms. A enters Makoto's consciousness and hears her final words. She decides to preserve Makoto's realm of consciousness and bring it back to Inazuma. When A returns, she discovers that the sacred Sakura has miraculously appeared atop Mount Yugu, even though, according to everyone else, it has existed for all eternity. A ultimately concludes that the tree is the result of a miracle connected to Makoto's consciousness, and that its sudden growth was the work of Istaroth, one of the Four Shades. The power of the sacred Sakura helps A defeat the monsters and suppress the calamity in Inazuma. The Greater Lord Rukkhadevata travels to Tunigi, where abyssal monsters were rampant. The remnants of the former Hydro Archon Ageria form the Amrita Pool. To anchor Ageria within the mortal world, Rukkhadevata grows the Harvest Toke. Simurgh finally awakens from its slumber. According to destiny, Simurgh drinks the Amrita, purifying it of the abyss, and sacrifices itself. Its form shatters into countless fragments of Kavarina, the most sentient of which become the Pari. The great beast Alinus appears in Fontaine, spreading severe contamination across both land and sea. Basil Elton, deputy director of the Institute and former admiral of the Fontaine Navy, comes out of retirement to confront this threat. The Fontaine Armada sails into its final battle. For 35 days, it pursues Alinus while drawing in abyssal monsters. Upon finally catching the beast, the Armada rams into it, resulting in the destruction of the flagship and the death of its entire crew, while mortally wounding Alinus. Alinus ultimately dies from its injuries but retains its consciousness. 500 years ago, the Abyss invades Natlan, and the region suffers more damage than any other in Teyvat due to weakened ley lines. During this time, fierce intertribal wars erupt among the tribes. Bakunawa was created by Rinnedater and enters Tenochtiroc, killing nearly all of its inhabitants, the Muratan, with the exception of Tenok, who was exiled out of necessity before the events of the Cataclysm. Several Pyro-Archons, Kochanina, Shulevitz, Glohari, and Isaiah unite to temporarily restrain Bakunawa. All of them perish, except for the last, who succeeds in holding it back. A historical figure named Tenok, known for wielding a gigantic obsidian club, gathers allies from each of the 6 major tribes to defend Natlan from a murky black tide, most likely referring to the Abyss. They later become known as the Heroes of Natlan. Mavuika rises as the Pyro Archon and joins Tenok's force. The site of their battle becomes the Ashen Sea. The Wild Hunt attacks Snezhnaya. The Tsaritsa ascends the throne as the new Cryo Archon. Node Cry becomes an autonomous region of Snezhnaya. Dainsleif, known as the Twilight Sword, was a royal guard of the Eclipse dynasty. He failed to protect the people of Khaenri'ah and was cursed with immortality, condemned to wander endlessly, and witnessed the people he was meant to protect turn into abyssal monsters and hilichurls. The native inhabitants of Khaenri'ah are deemed great sinners and are punished with the curse of immortality, while all other citizens' half-bloods, or those originating from other nations, are punished with the curse of the wilderness, which transforms them into monsters such as hilichurls, abyss mages, abyss heralds, or black serpents. Among them, Piero, the royal mage, Train, the commander, and Hrothgar a noble were afflicted with the curse of immortality, while Caribert, the illegitimate son of Hrothgar and an unnamed mother from Mondstadt, was afflicted with the curse of the wilderness, turning him into a hilichurl. The one-eyed King Ermin grows weak. The Alberich clan assumes the role of regents. This concludes the analysis. Share your thoughts in the comments. This was Lily, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. Bye-bye!